one question which is not on there, but I'm just curious about. Uh, I have found where you've been interviewed by people, but generally you send written responses.
Yeah,
Are there any actual recordings where you're talking?
I don't think so. No,
Okay, well, all right. So this is a world first. Uh,
possibly.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, so I'm grateful and honored actually.
Thank you.
Um, okay, so if I guess you must have accepted the recording, so we can just go. You ready?
Yeah.
Okay, so the first question that I had was, what is your ontology that allows magic to exist? I mentioned your hypersphere cosmology and 3D time models, which are pretty heavy-duty physics for people who are not used to that sort of thing. What I don't see in those is a role for consciousness and whether you see that as actually being central to the practice of magic.
I'm not sure that we know what we mean when we say consciousness. Um, I do wonder really if consciousness consists of anything other than the extremely complicated behavior of matter and energy arranged in very complex forms. It wouldn't surprise me at all if we couldn't duplicate any function of human consciousness in a machine if we could precisely specify what it was. I don't tend to subscribe to the otherness theory of consciousness. I think the entire universe is of one substance, which includes us, and we're just a very complicated bit of it, which has evolved senses and motor abilities and evolved a self-image which gives us an illusion of consciousness. Um, I mean, obviously, if you do anything in life, whether it's magic or baseball, it requires that you be conscious to do it. Um, but I don't necessarily think that there's anything particularly um, essential about the existence of consciousness for magic to occur. I think um, magic is a phenomena, is a natural phenomena, and it exists between what we would call unconscious objects. Um, we've got quantum entanglement between particles. We've got mysterious fields and connections going on. I think when we try and do magic, we're just exploiting natural phenomena. And I think the universe probably exploits these natural phenomena just to do the ordinary things it does. I mean, what enforces the laws of the universe? Why do all photons fly at light speed everywhere in the universe? There are certainly some very curious aspects to the purely physical universe, which I think may be able to account for magic. Although I don't precisely know how, but I'm quite intrigued by a lot of the stuff coming out of quantum theory
Mhm.
and various quantum experiments. Things like uh, re- retrocausality, for example.
Right.
Uh, it seems that that can occur just on a mechanical basis. You can set up quantum machines that appear to function by a degree of retrocausality. And that possibly allows humans to perform retroactive enchantment. Um, I don't see anything. I don't make a division in in my ontology, my feelings about the universe between natural and supernatural. I think the natural is quite supernatural in itself if you look at it deeply enough.
Right.
Um, that's the sort of attitude I take. I don't posit an extra realm of spirit or consciousness, as well as just the physical reality. I think physical reality is far richer than we suspect.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
You know,
certainly that's what quantum mechanics and the whole direction of physics has been teaching us. Yeah, I mean, some
well,
people might think that we're at the end of physics now because we have quantum mechanics and it's so good. I would say no, there will definitely be something that's even more comprehensive than quantum mechanics eventually. We don't know quite what that is, but there are a lot of people working on it.
I think we've barely started.
Yeah.
My my forays into this field are, well, it's something I started on very late, but I spent, most of my middle years working on this hypersphere cosmology idea. But I do think that there is and Roger Penrose has actually put this in print. There's something a bit squiffy about our understanding of time. Um, I I wonder if there's more dimensions to time than we normally perceive. I'm working on a model which in which time has the same kind of dimensionality of 3 as space.
Mm-hmm.
And that would potentially allow a lot of the phenomena that we wish to explain in esoterics. Possibly. I think it might also explain why there's no antimatter in this part of the universe. But these are all things I muck about with. The hypersphere cosmology itself, that's the thing I started on about 20 years ago, and it's got to the point where I think it offers a serious challenge to the conventional standard model expanding universe lambda CDM model, which has got a lot of problems. And the James Webb Telescope has just showed us how profound those problems are.
Mm-hmm.
In a hypersphere cosmology universe, the whole thing is closed under its own gravitational field, and it's a non-apocalyptic universe. It doesn't have an apocalyptic beginning or ending. And I think that may be metaphysically and philosophically important. The whole of Western monotheist civilization is based on the idea of beginnings and endings and apocalypses and things like that.
Right.
I tend to think that the hypersphere cosmology supports a more kind of pagan and holistic circular time view of things. We might, as a race, potentially live forever if we're careful about how we do things. And there might well.
You don't mean we in particular, but you mean
Not personally, no.
yeah,
But
humans or life.
yeah. Our race has come into existence and developed a certain amount of intelligence and understanding of the universe, but everybody's saying, oh, well, it won't last forever. It's only another 5 billion years till the planet's destroyed. But I think quite possibly, because time is in a way circular, it's finite and unbounded, you can never get more than about 13 billion years in time distant from anywhere else. But because it's circular, I think the universe is effectively eternal, and that there may be far, far more intelligent life in the universe, stuff infinitely more intelligent than us. Because an eternal universe basically it throws another factor into the Drake equation. Doesn't mean how long does it take for intelligence to develop, because it's got an infinite amount of time. So this has led me to the thought that there's probably a lot more to the universe than we currently suspect. I don't think we're anywhere near the end of physics. I think we've only scratched the surface, and things are going to get more interesting and weirder as we go along. Whether that'll lead to a further understanding of magic, I don't know. I mean, I base most of my magic on the theory that there are obvious physical connections between things, and quite likely an awful lot other that we don't know about, that only pops up occasionally in rogue experiments or under extreme circumstances. But it's worth having a go, I think, and see if you can forge connections between things which seem unconnected.
Can you give an example of what you mean by this? I mean, we know about entanglement, but are you saying something beyond that?
Well, entanglement, so far, we've only managed to establish it between, subatomic objects, but things like morphic fields, for example, I mean, scientifically controversial, but there's some fairly reasonable evidence for it, which nevertheless remains a matter of considerable argument. But could this not be getting us back towards something like the ancients posited in the theory of forms? Do similar structures in the universe have some kind of resonance between them?
Yep, that would certainly fit in with magical lore.
Some kind of law of similarity,
right?
And perhaps contagion, between things which have similar forms.
Mm-hmm.
Is that? I mean, I reject the or Baroque forms of Neoplatonism, but the idea of Platonism generally, which has underlain a great deal of mystic and esoteric thought, seems to suggest that whilst things don't maybe have a spirit in the religious sense, maybe somehow communicates itself around the universe. I mean, there have been many examples of even ideas which have popped up at the same time in different cultures.
Mm-hmm.
The idea that once one monkey on this one side of the planet learns a new trick, immediately monkeys on the other side of the planet seem to be able to pick up the trick much more quickly.
Mm-hmm.
Do thoughts and structures exist in some kind of non-local way, in the same way that entanglement does? Could it be that the universe is connected not just between microscopic phenomena where the effect seems very strong, somehow constrains fundamental particles of the same type to have the same qualities everywhere, but perhaps on a slightly looser level with macro structures? Does it possibly mean that astonish me to find, for example, that aliens looked or behave somewhat similar to us? I mean, there'll be lots of weird differences, but it wouldn't surprise me if there's such a thing as a form that intelligent organisms tend to gravitate towards, and that permeates the universe. I'm not saying we're going to find exactly humanoid creatures everywhere, but I think we probably, if we do encounter them, they possibly have more in common than us than you might just expect from purely random evolution.
Mm-hmm. Well, certainly that's how aliens are presented in fiction, right? They're almost,
yes,
they're humanoid, and amazingly, some of them also speak English.
Yes, well, I wouldn't expect that.
Yeah.
But I do wonder if, we shouldn't perhaps expect aliens to have a completely incomprehensible form of consciousness to us. I think possibly if there is such a thing as a morphic field associated with life, it's probably going to take an approximately similar form anywhere. I mean, it's probably going to have to be based on carbon chemistry for a kickoff. But should we perhaps expect more? I would expect they probably develop the same mathematics as us. Obviously, a different notation, possibly even different base notation, but certain things like Pythagoras' theorem, it's been thought worthwhile sticking plates bearing Pythagoras' theorem into spacecraft in case anybody comes across it, or even broadcasting Pythagoras' theorem into the ether to see if anybody picks it up and say, "Oh, there's a mark of intelligence."
Well, of course, that works for linear space. If somebody
Yeah,
lives in a non-Euclidean space, they may say, "Well, they got it almost right."
yeah.
So, a question about hypersphere cosmology: is that resonate at all with the idea of multiverse?
Basically, no. I think there is just, well, by definition, there is just the one universe, and I think actually that we can probably see virtually all the way across it now. I think it's finite and unbounded. It's closed in space and time. It's not infinite beyond what we can see. It would surprise me immensely if it was.
And
I mean,
so,
if there was a universe next door, why isn't its gravity exerting a huge effect on this universe?
well,
You'd have to.
it might be. I mean, maybe that's why we're expanding quickly, why we're accelerating.
Well, I think that's a very questionable assumption from the data. You can certainly observe redshifts on different galaxies, but what does a redshift mean? It just says that light that has traveled a long distance is redshifted. There's more than one way of explaining that. I mean, that's the one they've chosen. I don't necessarily agree. I mean, I find the basic model has got a lot of flaws in it. I mean, it assumes that there must have been an initial singularity, which is, to me, literally incredible. It's not believable. And then there must have been an inflationary period in which space itself expanded millions of times faster than light. And then there must have been something which made the astonishingly, I mean, just insanely dense singularity expand. And then halfway through its expansion, dark matter must have turned up out of nowhere and started to create weird effects. There's a lot of peculiar problems with it. The expansion rate, we have a crisis in cosmology at the moment. The expansion rate looks different depending on how you measure it, whether you measure it from the cosmic microwave background radiation or whether you measure it on the redshift of relatively local galaxies. That can't really be resolved. There's no mechanism for it. There's no mechanism for inflation, really. I mean, we can describe it, but the description isn't really a mechanism. It's just a description. The anomalous is the whole thing is a bit of a. It's called a concordance model because they just try to lump everything into the basket of an expanding universe, and the fit is getting progressively less comfortable the more observations we make.
Mhm.
The
But
whole theory is
in
a bit
many
ridden
ways,
with anomalies.
what you're pointing out is one of the joys of science, where we create a
Yeah,
model of what we think is going on, and then we start finding that some bits of it don't really fit anymore as our observations become better, and so we'll come up with a new model. So there's
yeah. Well, hopefully so. Yeah. I mean, I, I do hope to outlive the Big Bang model. I'm hopeful.
well, if some portion of us may live for eternity, I guess maybe part of us will figure it out, or some
Yeah.
kind of connection. So I think some people who are listening to this may be surprised that as one of the most lauded modern magicians, that you're actually very interested and knowledgeable about leading edge physics. And I think,
Yeah. I mean, Thomas Vaughan pointed out centuries ago, that a witch is a rebel in physics.
mm,
And really, if you're going to say, well, I'm doing things outside the realms of conventional physics when I muck about with magic, then I ought to at least give some thought as to how I reconcile those two views. And indeed, I did have a science education. I did chemistry at uni.
mm,
Should have done physics, but I enjoyed explosives when I was a teenager.
uh-huh.
I wouldn't be able to get away with that now. But yeah, I think that the laws, the physics, or the mechanisms of physics, if we look at them deeply enough, we'll find something in there which explains a lot of parapsychological phenomena, if not all of it, really.
Mhm.
I mean, the exploration of psychology has given us a fairly good model of why religion works, for example. I think there's nothing much in religion that you can't explain uh, by a modern approach to psychology. The mechanisms of belief, why we believe things,
Mhm.
um, way imaginary phenomena can create real effects. Uh,
Well, in the body for sure, but magic proposes that it goes outside of the body.
yeah, well, there again, physics uh, proposes the current model is that there are, I believe, 26 quantum fields pervading all of space. Um, at the last count, there's a separate field for virtually every kind of fundamental force and fundamental particle, and such fields, according to the theory of at least last week, um, pervade all of space and indeed possibly create what we call space.
Mm.
Uh,
Are you referring
I
to
mean,
the standard model, the quantum version of the standard?
yeah,
Yeah,
quantum field theory, which is the most up to date
yeah.
thing in that domain. Yeah, says that space time is pervaded by at least 26 separate fields, all in the same time and space.
Mhm.
And that these excitations of these fields give rise to all the various kinds of particles and the interactions between them. I mean, it's an intensely mathematical structure, which is extremely difficult to form any kind of visual or even verbal picture of.
Right.
And it may all turn out to be nonsense, but at least that's the theory they're currently working on. It's a lot more complicated than the good old Kabbalah, but you never know.
So
Yes.
in a mathematical physical universe, whether it's more complicated than we currently understand, which is certainly true. Where's the role for agency? Because a large chunk of magic, especially on the enchantment side, is about agency, right?
Yeah.
I want something and it happens. So how do you think we plug that into physics?
Well, physical phenomena appear to have a great deal of agency, don't they? Um, a um, a physical body is it maintains even something like a piece of rock isn't just there doing nothing. It's very actively asserting its presence in space-time. You know, it's bending space-time around it with its gravitational field. It's a seething mass of activity inside. The particles moving around inside its atoms are moving at several hundred miles an hour. It repels other objects which collide with it. It reflects light. It does all kinds of things.
Right, but see, I wouldn't. I know what you're saying, that our description of the way that charge works and fields work and so on, but it doesn't seem to have agency in the sense of a desire. It's more like a passive mechanism, as opposed to I want to have a donut now.
Yeah, well, I mean, a tree is a very active mechanism, isn't it?
Yes,
And we wouldn't say it had consciousness, but it certainly goes about shifting soil out the way of its roots, pulling photons out of the sky, absorbing water, making seeds and dispersing them. I mean, it's an arrangement of matter which is highly dynamic, as are we. We have the additional property that we claim to have self-awareness,
right.
And free will. You
So
can't explain free will in entirely mechanistic terms, but I submit that you could easily make a machine to demonstrate any required degree of free will. You probably wouldn't want to, but you could do it. You could program a computer to work out its 2 or 3 best options and then say randomly pick one of the best 3. Or you could have it randomly select courses of action and then use a bit of logic to decide between them. Or you could have a cascading hierarchical process to evolve its final behavior. And I think we do nothing much more than that, really. When I say that I have agency, a dyed-in-the-wool materialist might say, well, you might think you do, but everything you do is actually, caused by previous phenomena that have occurred to you.
right. But so
But I would say my actions are also partly random, and if I choose to identify with my randomness, that's as good as free will, isn't it?
I suppose, but notice the kind of a paradox here, that in order to refer to what we want to do, we're referring to I or me.
Mm.
And then if I have the illusion of being aware, what is it that's having that illusion? Doesn't that thing
It's one part. It's one part of yourself monitoring another part of yourself,
recursion? Yeah.
and I don't think it's always the same part. In extreme states of mind or whatever, the center of yourself moves about or changes into something else, or it's temporarily absent. I think it's basically a construct. If you wanted to make a machine self-aware, you'd have to modularize it inside so that various bits of it were looking at other bits of it.
Mm-hmm.
It would have to be a kind of self-referential thing, but there would be nothing that could look at the whole thing from the outside. I think we live under the illusion that our mind is looking at the whole of our mind all the time, where it plainly isn't.
Right. Yeah. At
You know,
last,
I'm not.
at last I looked, there's now considered over 100 different regions of the brain.
Yeah, that's why introspection fails to find the center of the self.
Yeah. So I think people listening would be surprised at our conversation so far, because we hardly talked about magic at all. And I think surprising in that your ontology seems quite different from the usual esoteric philosophies, which are based on idealism or panpsychism or something like that.
Well, I don't necessarily rule out panpsychism or, you know, a modest form of Platonism or Neoplatonism.
Mhm.
You know, I think that forms and structures are able to communicate their form and structure across space and time to some extent.
Mhm.
But that doesn't mean that, you know, spirits and angels and deities have that much reality beyond whatever we project into them.
Mhm.
But I do think that the idea that the mind is not a unitary self does rather fit in with what I regard as modern magical practice.
Hmm.
The idea that there's a hell of a lot of stuff inside our heads, you know, because we've observed so much human behavior amongst our fellows and absorbed it. And because we have a pretty broad bio program in ourselves, the gods are potentially within us, but also projectable.
Mhm. Yeah.
I
So
mean, for me,
we're discussing a pretty radical shift. I would say the modern shift beyond Aleister Crowley, it really into a modern worldview. I mean, that's a real break from the past.
I mean, some decades ago, older occultists said to me, you know, when you've been in this game for a long time, old boy, you'll eventually come to believe in the reality of spirits. Anyone who mucks about with occultism for long enough ends up believing in the reality, the objective reality of spirits. But you know, basically, I still don't, because I've evoked completely imaginary deities, like my favorite Apophenia, goddess of weird connections between things. Now, I mean, she didn't exist till about a decade or two ago. I think it's technically her 18th birthday now. She was created on an internet forum, and we have basically projected a certain amount of existence in her, means that we can invoke this goddess and treat it as well, you might say pretend real. I mean, we know it's within ourselves, but it's a bit of ourselves which is not normally easily accessible. And the purpose of doing an invocation is to make it more accessible. So, I mean, my answer to the question of the reality of spirits and deities and things is that basically we have worlds within us. We have strange capacities.
So does that spirit, do you think that that spirit now exists independently of those of you who've created it?
Where I disagree radically with Rupert Sheldrake about morphic fields. I did send a friend with a question to one of his lectures. I said, does the morphic field of dinosaurs still exist? And he insisted that yes, it does. Whereas I tend to think that the gods on spirits, etc., exist only, and although they may have effects outside of people and between people, they only exist while somebody's, if you like, worshipping them. I did suggest an experiment once. Sheldrake made much of the fact that chemists observed that whenever a completely new chemical compound was synthesized, it's normally very difficult to get it to crystallize. But once it has crystallized, subsequent experiments anywhere around the world, it usually crystallizes quite quickly. The time taken for crystallization is as though, assuming that some of these highly complicated chemicals are existing for the first time in the universe because we've made something weird, it doesn't really know how to form a crystal when it starts. But once it comes across a shape that works, it sticks with it. In other words, it's created a morphic field,
right,
which make it continue to crystallize subsequently in that form. But I proposed an experiment which has never been performed. I said, right, let's set up some remotely controlled apparatus, maybe just even filled apparatus, that creates a completely novel compound and times its crystallization process, and then performs it in a lab next door and see if the process is any shorter. Do that several times to see if there's a measurable effect, and then destroy all the samples of it anywhere that exists and start again. Does it depend on there being the actual physical form persisting in the universe for, if you like, the psychic form or the platonic form to have any effect? I mean, I think it's there's got to be a cutoff, because otherwise, if the back of your neck itches when someone's staring at you, why doesn't it itch forever?
You mean that when somebody applies an intention that only acts as a form or an idea during the time
Yeah.
that it's occurring?
During the time it's in the person who's projecting its head.
Yeah.
Once they've forgotten about it, the effect presumably wears off. I do wonder otherwise, psychic phenomena, the whole universe is going to be so crowded with psychic phenomena if there's no decay or cutoff when the thing which is projecting them ceases to project them. So I do think there's, I mean, obviously that's somewhat rational, mechanistic kind of thinking. But I think ultimately we will come to a rational and mechanistic explanation of a lot of the phenomena in magic. That's my worldview, part wizard, part scientist.
Okay, so this is a great segue to my second question, which is that you recommended in many of your writings that magicians not participate in psi experiments. And so you've given a couple of reasons why that is, but I wonder, given that you just suggested a nice experiment, why can't magicians participate?
Well, that's a purely mechanical experiment, could be done without any pretense of using psychism. That's trying to just work out whether there's some kind of physical mechanism in the universe. There's a number of reasons I don't like getting involved in psi experiments. I mean, they're set up in such a way as to make the use of psi really rather difficult. Laboratory conditions, etc. Looking for statistical results which are repeatable. Whereas for me, magic is always a kind of one-off thing. that I do because I really intensely want something to happen, and I just do it the once.
Mhm.
And I'm not likely to do it again, whether it succeeds or fails. If it fails, I might try some completely different approach. Um, Trying to sit down and go through hundreds of guesses of Zener cards. I mean, it's been established that there is a decline effect with that kind of work.
Mhm.
That if you're trying to do the old Zener cards, guessing 1 out of 5, typically a lot of people do well for the first few guesses, and then they just get exhausted or bored or tired with it, and then it just drops back to normal probability. I mean, I'll give you a funny example of this. I was teaching a load of boys in a Catholic boys' school, biology. It was a bit of a shambolic school, and we could do pretty much what we liked as teachers. And as part of the biology module, it was only a low priority examination subject. We were supposed to have some discussion of psychology, and being Catholics, they immediately wanted to know about occultism and parapsychology. So I said, well, we can try some experiments if you like. And so one of them, I brought in a whole heap of science magazines and stuck them on the front desk. And I said, right, me and all the rest of the boys will sit facing the teacher's desk, and you can go up one at a time and pick up a magazine and just open it at random and stare at the first picture that interests you. And me and the whole of the rest of the class will attempt to draw what you're looking at. And then you'll hold it up and we'll either go, wow, or oh, fail. And we tried it and the results were messy, well, that could be a bit like what he was looking at, but well, yeah. And then they said, oh, go on, you have a go, sir. So I walked up to the front, and I was feeling a bit put on the spot because it was frankly a bit disappointing. And so hang on, it was the other way around. I was standing at the front watching the kids, yeah, and then they said, "You come and sit with us, and you can see what the kid is looking at." And the kid went up and picked up a magazine, and he stood there staring at it, and we all started scribbling. And as he picked it up, I just had a sudden intuition about what he was looking at. I mean, there was no surfaces behind him. There would have been a reflection. So I just drew it. And then he held the picture up, and I held my picture up. I said, there you are. And they said, oh, wow, it's extraordinary, sir. How the hell did you do that? And I said, I don't know. I just thought that was what he was looking at. And he said, that's amazing, isn't it? No, it's a trick, isn't it? No, it's got to be a trick. How did you do it? And fortunately, the bell went, and that was the end of it. But, it was just a lucky one-off, really. I mean, if we'd done it 100 times, I'm sure I wouldn't have got anywhere with it,
Well, see, if you had done it 100 times in a row, you're probably
If
right.
I'd done it 100 times in a row, I think I'd have been taken off to a
Right.
room beneath the MI5 building.
Yeah,
They did experiment with that in the war.
no, I think I've seen you mention this before, that there's some concern about the really effective magicians being taken into dark room somewhere and forced to do the bidding of some nefarious government agencies.
Well, if you were doing one of your science experiments and somebody started hitting about 80 or 90% of it, what would your reaction be?
I would be both pleased. I would be concerned that in trying to publish it, that the people reading the paper won't believe it. Uh,
Yeah.
I
But
don't think
wouldn't
No, I don't think that anybody, I mean, there's so much pressure, at least within in the United States,
Yeah.
to suppress this kind of thing that they simply wouldn't believe it.
Yeah, but I think if you found somebody who could do that, you wouldn't publish it. You go out with them and exploit the ability to its maximum, wouldn't you?
Well, I would say I don't think I would use the word exploit, but provided that the
You'd
person
make
was
yourself rich and famous and powerful
no, no, no,
using it.
no.
No,
No, my
no,
interest, I'm driven by curiosity about how this plugs
yeah,
into the rest of science. So if provided that the person was interested in pursuing additional experiments, I would work with them to try to figure out to the best of our knowledge, how can we understand what is actually going on here? So is it like you said, is it a form of macroscopic entanglement or some slippage in time or something like that? There's a million experiments that come to mind once you have somebody who's really good at doing these kinds of tasks.
yeah. But I still think that anybody who could do those kind of science experiments uh, massively impressively would no longer bother with it. They go out and make a fortune with it, or make themselves president, or whatever, wouldn't they? Or
Maybe,
become a paid psychic assassin.
no, I think maybe some people who are drawn to power might want to do that.
Yeah,
Maybe that's more prevalent within the magical traditions, but at least among within myself and my colleagues, that's not what we're drawn to. I mean, I've been working for a nonprofit for over 20 years now, and we are not making a lot of
yeah.
money. I'm doing it
No,
because of
no.
the
I
interest
can
of the topic.
I can see what your motivation is, but I mean, it strikes me a form of research which, if it managed to produce um, a really strong effect, it would it would rapidly become used for something quite non-academic, wouldn't it?
It may well, because what you're correct
Yeah,
in is that we were sometimes approached by business people who want to
yeah.
take the low-hanging fruit and turn it into something that will make a profit. That's true.
Mm.
But it's not true of everyone that's
No.
studying these things, right? I mean, as I said, my motivation is very different. Uh, but and so in this experiment that I just recently finished, and I've submitted the article for publication, half of the participants were meditators and half were magicians.
Mm.
And so in this, I did this partially because of funding came from an organization interested in magic. And the magicians did significantly better. And I think the reason is that at least for enchantment magic, that unlike meditators who are highly practiced at an inward focus of attention, the magicians doing enchantment magic have an outward focus of attention. And the target in this case was a physical device, an optical system that was not inside them, it was
Yeah,
outside of them. So
yeah,
something as simple as the direction to which you're practiced in focusing your attention looks like it. I don't know if it's a new discovery, but it was for me. And in hindsight, it's sort of obvious, but it wasn't before I got these results.
yeah. Well, I think intention is a massive part of it. Um, and half the problem with magic is it's very difficult to maintain an intention consistently, isn't it? Particularly with through experiments that demand a great deal of repetition and repeatability.
Right.
Um, for me, magic always has the quality of a one-off thing.
Hmm.
Um, you know, I've had some pretty improbable things occur, and I've had some, well, I wouldn't call them divinations, but I've had some intuitions that panned out.
Hmm.
But I can't say as I know exactly what the conditions are to reproduce those effects.
I thought
There are all
I thought
such
your
singular events.
but I thought your equations of magic actually
Mm.
are pretty close to what we have found in the laboratory. And the one that is so difficult to maintain in the laboratory, as you've already mentioned, is motivation.
Yeah.
It's really tough to maintain when you bring in somebody into the laboratory and require them to be highly motivated.
Yeah. I mean, I did suggest an experiment to you in in a previous exchange in which I said, well, why not just get people in and give them a one-off chance to win a very substantial amount of money,
Hmm.
you know, but by throwing a dice. Uh, and you said, well, uh, part of the problem with that is that we couldn't even let them throw the dice because um,
Yeah.
that would be not regarded as sufficiently scientifically clean, you know.
Well, but we could have a machine throw the dice. Why
Yeah,
that? Yeah. So there, no,
but
that could
surely
be,
it's
it could be done. Yes.
the the way I look at magic is um, I can't consciously throw a dice any distance to get the number I want. If I'm throwing a dice along a carpet or something, not caring what happens, the effect is effectively random.
Hmm.
Um, but I do think that perhaps in a situation of extreme want or extreme stress or high excitement, you've probably got a greater chance of getting the effect you want.
Hmm.
And putting a machine in and just doubles the difficulty. You know, I mean, I
Well,
would say that if I can get my subconscious to somehow guide my hand in a way which couldn't be um, rigorously scientifically described, to throw it in such a way that I got what I wanted, then I would be satisfied that that was magic.
I see. So
Similarly,
if you had a robot hand or
mm,
robot arm and you still would get a substantial prize if the die falls a certain way, and now you press a button and the robot throws the die, you think that wouldn't have the same level of motivation?
it would. I would certainly far rather be throwing it myself.
Mm,
I, I haven't tested this obviously, and it's not easy to test because I'm talking about something which will be done just once or twice for something I really intensely wanted.
yeah.
But I think you could possibly influence what a machine did, but it would be far easier to, as it were, influence yourself uh, in ways which couldn't be logically specified.
Well, does it fit in
Uh,
within your equations of magic? One of the factors, which is not easy for me to understand, is magical link. Is what you're describing something like that? That you need like a personal relationship with the object?
uh, um, I think anything which involves trying to change the exterior world, um, you've got to know something about the target.
Mhm.
Uh,
Well,
you can't really attempt to project something like this idea. Oh, just write that person's name on a piece of paper, and I will send them a blessing or good wishes.
mhm.
Well, what the heck? You've got nothing but a name. There are probably hundreds of people with that name in the universe, in the world. Um, I think you really need to have, at least in your subconscious or your mind somewhere, something to connect you with the target that you're trying to work with. Um,
So here's the question. Is that your belief? And if you believe it, it will be so. But the reason why I'm questioning is because in remote viewing, for example, you're given a random number and you're not told
mm,
anything about what the random
mm.
number points to, and people can still do it, right? So there's no,
If someone said to me, "Can you tell me what's going on at a certain location now?" I'd be far more confident in attempting it if I'd actually been there at some point in the future and knew what I was looking for,
Hmm.
if you know what I mean. Um,
And yet it's not necessary. I mean, we know empirically it's not necessary.
have you actually tested the difference between the quality of remote viewing results you get, whether people have or haven't actually ever been to the place?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know of a study that has looked at that question. So you're predicting that if people have been to the various locations, the possible locations, that experiment might work better.
Well, I think so, yeah. I mean, I've had occasionally psychic messages from my mother, whom, I have a not a very close relationship. She lives quite a way away. I don't see her very often. Um, but I've had a few distinct
Mm,
and unequivocal psychic messages from her over the years, stuff that I've rang her up on the telephone and said, I've just, she said, yes, that is in fact what has happened.
mm,
But I mean, I don't get those things from all the thousands of people between myself and my mother's location,
right,
because I have no connection to them. There's no resonance with them. Uh, they don't even know of my existence, and I don't know of theirs.
right.
I
So,
mean,
but
if you just asked me to try and psychically communicate with a random person on the planet, I mean, even a photograph isn't much good. I would think if I had met them and spent a bit of time with them, I might have a better chance. That's what the sort of thing I mean by a magical link.
okay. So, but I would interpret that as saying that the the idea of the link then is how you use your attention, because most of us all the time are surrounded by a gazillion bits of information, but we're only attending to a tiny little trickle. And so
Yeah,
other people that you don't know are going to end up being essentially mental noise or psychic noise. Whereas
yeah.
the 15 people who you know and have some reason to want to be connected to, it simply makes it through the noise easier, just like the cocktail party effect.
Well, yeah, I think it's probably something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
in principle, I think you could actually connect to anyone living and maybe even dead just by connecting through the past. Without having, I mean, so you're creating a magical link by virtue of the nature of the task. I would guess.
Well, I don't know. I mean, when you talk about, uh, trying to communicate with somebody non-physically, uh, I would say you've surely got to know them, or spend some time in their company. I mean, just an image off a TV. I don't think you can beam a thought to somebody on that basis.
Well, that's what,
Well, maybe some people think you can, but
yeah, but
I, I wouldn't be comfortable with trying even.
that's what mediums claim to be able to do. Of course,
Well,
yeah. So there's other interpretations of what a medium does, but at least that's their experience.
yeah,
So,
but one of the things about mediums that I think, I mean, there's obviously trickery and fraud and cold reading available, but when a medium does come up with something that immediately surprises and satisfies the client, where is that information most likely coming from?
yeah, from the client.
It's coming from the client.
Yeah,
The client's intensely thinking about old Uncle Fred. And is the medium, if the medium can actually do that sort of thing, is the medium picking up on the actual psychic remains of poor dead Uncle Fred, or are they just picking up on what the customer is thinking about?
yeah. This has been the question for 140 years.
Yeah.
to try to figure out how do we make a discrimination. And there are some modern clever methods that are trying to get at that question. I don't think it's
Yeah.
resolved yet, but people are trying.
Yeah.
Let's move on to the last question I had, which was uh, where do you see magic headed as the zeitgeist across many scientific and scholarly disciplines are increasingly entertaining ideas like idealism, panpsychism, and so on, all of which these ideas assume that consciousness is fundamental in some way. And of course, all of them are compatible with magic.
Well, I think, there is an increasing awareness and an increasing desire to see the universe in holistic terms, where everything, there is connections between things.
Mhm.
Um, and I think people are becoming more aware of the strange and awesome possibilities of intent and imagination.
Mhm.
And I think we can use our intent and imagination to do both amazing and appalling things. But I think that when we do dreadful things, it's really because of a lack of awareness of the connectedness of everything.
Mhm.
If we appreciated how much uh, the biosphere is intimately connected with itself and with the planet and with everything else, and if we had some appreciation of how ideas and philosophies and ideologies have consequences,
Mhm.
um, then we might behave a little better, and we might start using our imagination uh, more creatively and less destructively. Um, I mean, it's possibly, a lack of empathy with the bigger picture, which leads us to do dreadful things as a race and as individuals. So yeah, I think it's a hopeful sign that humanity is becoming slightly more aware of a more holistic, possibly even what you might call panpsychic perspective,
Mhm.
an appreciation of the interconnectedness of everything.
Which is
Um,
pretty deeply, I think, wrapped into magical assumptions, right? If things are truly separate, then your intention is not going to do anything other than in your own body, perhaps.
I mean, if thoughts have consequences, we would if we seriously believe that thoughts had consequences, we might be more careful with them.
Mhm.
Um, Not even really very, very aware of the possible consequences of our own technology, are we? We're rushing headlong into all sorts of crazy,
Yeah.
crazy things. Um, humans always take the very short term and usually selfish short term options, don't they?
Right.
Um,
That's
yeah, possibly some magical awareness might help cure a bit of that. I don't know. Um,
Would you advocate in elementary schools or the beginning schools to have a course on magic for kids? Because part of the idea of that is to teach the interconnectedness of everything, including your thoughts.
well, yes. I mean, we shouldn't though call it magic, should we?
Yeah,
But
I
I
don't
think,
know.
yeah, I did a bit of school teaching for a while, and I always thought, well, if I was going to try and teach the kids magic, firstly, I wouldn't write that on the syllabus.
Right.
I'd put down things like, concentration, meditation, uh,
Mhm.
testing the effects of intent and belief, and the effect of archetypes as well.
Hmm.
Um, I mean, we live in a world full of imaginary constructs, which have quite profound effects on real phenomena. You know, we live in a world of archetypes and images and largely imaginary constructions, you know, role models and things like that,
Mm-hmm.
which are all really like imaginary constructions, but they have quite real effects.
Right.
I mean, I'd ask kids to sit down and watch a whole heap of TV adverts and say, you know, what is that advert trying to conjure in your mind? You know, what is it really selling you? Is it really selling you the product, or is it selling you some nonsense that will make you buy the product?
Mm-hmm.
And similarly with the things politicians say. Yeah, I could see trying to introduce a slightly magical perspective into education. You know,
Mm-hmm.
when
Yeah.
when uh, when you're taught role models or taught to admire people or despise other people, what is it you're really getting at? And have you got that thing in yourself as well?
Mm-hmm.
You know, the beginner's guide to invocation, as it were.
Right.
Uh, that's the sort of thing I'd be interested in doing in a magical course of education for little people.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And also the power of intent, I think, too.
Right.
Um, I mean, there's such things are used in quite widely in sports training
Yes.
as well. Um, Imagine you can do it and suddenly you get better at it, sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, the power of the mind, as it were. Yeah,
Right.
that's the sort of things I'd concentrate on in a junior magical education.
Well, I think you're right that to a large extent, the advertising business and people involved in branding and so on, that's kind of a glamoring magic,
Mm,
right?
mm,
You create and certainly in the beauty industry, it's all about
mm.
glamoring.
Oh yeah. I mean, it's one of my definitions of magic. You know, the use of imaginary phenomena to create real effects.
Mm.
Uh, I mean, Crowley brought this up in one passage. He he narrates a story about two people on a train, and one guy says to another, "What do you got in that basket, my friend?" He said, "It's a mongoose." And he said, "What do you want a mongoose for?" And he said, "Well, my brother's a bit strange. He sees snakes everywhere." But the guy said, "Yeah, but those snakes aren't real, are they?" And the guy said, "No, and the mongoose isn't real either."
Yeah, yeah, that's a good story.
Yes, but I mean, certainly, we all live by archetypes and imaginary constructions, don't we? I think we should possibly examine the effect to which we can take control of these things.
Right.
Um, I
Well,
mean,
all great advancements in science and technology start with somebody's imagination.
yeah,
It takes a lot of work to turn it into something in the physical world that the rest of us live in, but that's where it starts from.
indeed, the imagination has built our entire environment, hasn't it? Really,
Yeah, all of it.
yes. And we don't actually ever teach imagination as a skill, do we? Not specifically.
And I think
I mean,
in
we
many
just
cases,
hope.
there's the opposite, right?
Yeah,
I don't know about the educational system in the UK, but at least in the US, to some extent, you're required to learn certain things. And so
yeah,
we don't want you drifting off into imaginary worlds because
yeah,
then, you're learning about unicorns and magic pandas and stuff.
yeah. I must admit, I spent a lot of my education in imaginary worlds. There were half a dozen. I was only really interested in the science and the maths and the history,
Mhm.
a bit of geography. When it came to things like French and Latin, I would just sit there and go off on completely imaginary journeys for 40 minutes
Yeah,
instead of listening to the lesson.
yeah,
Um,
I'm
I
familiar
think
with that.
one of my most favorite lessons was detention, actually, I finally realized. Um, in the school I went to was an old style grammar school, a kind of mock public school that we had years ago. And if you got punished for doing something, you'd simply have to, after school, sit in a room at a desk with your hands on the desk, face in front, and do absolutely nothing for either half an hour for a minor offense or a full hour for a big offense.
Wow.
And it was amazing to do that, really. I mean, it was supposed to be a punishment, but it was absolutely after you kind of got into it and your imagination started soaring. For me, it was fabulous.
Mm.
And then we had some young trendy teacher came in, and he was given the job of supervising detention. And he said to the boys, there was about 6 or 7 of us in the detention. He said, "Look, let's not waste your time." He said, "Do your homework while you're here." It
Mm.
really spoilt it.
Mm. Yeah, no,
Yeah.
that's a torture.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that's actually also interesting that I didn't prepare this question in advance, but I'm asked this question all the time, so I'll ask you too if you have time, because we're over an hour at this point, but
Oh,
you're willing to take another 10 minutes or so. I'd like to
yeah,
ask.
yeah, no rush.
Okay, so I'm asked oftentimes in interviews, it's given that I'm doing an unusual job and there are no jobs of this type anyway, how did I end up doing this? So I have an
Mm.
answer to that, but I think that's the question that I would ask to you. So you're in detention, you're enjoying using your imagination, which not every kid knows how to do. So I'm guessing that you were stimulated by imagination, and that may be what brought you into magic.
Very much so, I think. Yes. I mean, as soon as I started doing chemistry at college, I got incredibly bored because I realized I knew quite enough chemistry to satisfy my curiosity about that aspect of reality.
Mm.
I realized I didn't want to try and make a living either working in somebody's laboratory or making illicit explosives or drugs because it was too risky.
Yeah.
So I rapidly thought, well, I know all the chemistry I want to know. I'm not really interested in the incredible minutiae of it. So I started reading esoteric books at college, and suddenly you were just in an absolute fantastical world.
Mm.
Um, a world which seemed to have some rules according to some people and a different set of rules according to other people. And obviously, a lot of the people involved in it were fantastically imaginative and or gullible.
Mm.
But I thought, well, what an amazing kind of field to muck about in. You know, can I make any sense of this? And my first attempt to write books on magic, and my first attempts to get people together and do magic or do it on my own was, you know, can I get what I want out of this? You know, can I make my imagination real? Can I get it to have an effect on the universe? And that's really how I got into it, I think.
Well, so you
Um,
must have met with some early success because otherwise you would have dropped it.
well, yes. I mean, this is quite the case, I think. And indeed, whenever I teach magic to people, always the first thing I say is just pick up a wand and try and do something. You know, in my Arcanorium college, enchantment comes first.
Mm.
You know, exercise one, go out and cut a wand, and try and do something with it and get a result. That gets rid of half the people immediately. And those who had beginner's luck possibly go on to experiment with other things. So yeah, I think I had a fair old bit of beginner's luck.
Do you really think it was luck, or is that some people are more talented than others?
Oh, I don't know. I don't know. I mean, I do have a quite an imagination, I have to say. I can't um, stop making and creating things. I
Mhm.
can't stop mucking around with ideas and researching ideas. And I think I do have a fair bit of willpower and self-discipline as well.
Mhm.
Um, Unlike a lot of people who get involved in esoterics.
Yeah.
Um,
So,
Lazy, become lazy and arrogant and think they can do anything when in fact they can't hardly do anything at all.
right. So I would say
And
that what you're describing actually is a talent. It's a complex talent that has a combination of the ability to imagine easily, and to have the discipline to be able to use it. That I mean, it's like the artistic talent in many ways.
well, it could be, yeah, yeah. I've never done a lot of art. I do a little bit of sculpture, but I can't really get my head around the trickery involved in painting. I admire people who can do it,
Mhm.
but I can't reduce the number of dimensions in things. Um,
Yeah, that's why I said it's like an artistic talent because it requires some of the same skills. But if you're not used to or have been trained in the kinesthetic side of art, then basically you're doing it purely mentally, which in some respects is more difficult.
well, perhaps so. Yeah.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, perhaps there is some overlap there. Perhaps magic is my art, what I do instead of art.
Mhm.
Yeah. I mean, whenever I make magical instruments and things, I always try and make them to good aesthetics, well, what I consider good aesthetic standards.
Mhm.
Although technically you could just pick up a screwdriver and pretend it was a magic wand, but I do like a magic wand to look like a magic wand.
Yeah.
Yes. And I spend a lot of time making them. But in many ways, um, that's just all part of the intention, really. Um,
Mhm. I think that too is a talent. The reason I'm saying this is because I could easily imagine if you have a class of 100 people that some people will drop out immediately, as you said, and others will not have either the motivation or the intention or something that enables them to have enough success so they will keep at it. And so that's
yeah,
that's the 1 in 100 people who will end up being a magician at the end,
hey, yeah,
or maybe
yes,
less.
I think you're probably right there. Yeah, it's certainly not for everybody. Um, but yeah, and I mean, it doesn't work brilliantly, but for me, it works often enough to make it worthwhile.
Right.
You
Yeah, it,
know,
it it doesn't need to work well. I don't know how to interpret brilliantly in this case, but it doesn't need to work very often. It just needs to work when you really need it to work.
yeah. Well, I've always looked at it as in terms of probability. Um, that I try and throw my magic in on top of what I'm doing in life to increase my chances of the thing succeeding.
Mhm.
That magical equation I developed that shows you how the natural probability of an event can, in theory, be modified by adding a certain amount of magic to it.
Mhm.
But what that shows is it's only really worth using magic on stuff which has a non-zero probability of occurrence anyway.
Right.
I think if you can give yourself a small percentage of advantage in any field, it's worth taking it. I mean, I used to give a course on chaos magic in business because I spent most of the middle part of my life running my own business.
Mm.
Just run it up from scratch to quite a substantial sized business with export facilities and everything. But from the point of view of the starting position, the result was almost miraculous, and I've been able to retire quite comfortably. I probably wouldn't be in such a good position now if I'd taken any sort of conventional job. But it wasn't, as I say to people, conjuring for the spontaneous appearance of a pile of gold bricks is a complete waste of time. But putting together a succession of conjurations for gradual increments in a venture, can eventually lead to something worth a great deal more than a pile of gold bricks.
Yeah.
So I always try and throw magic in on stuff which is not impossible, in the hope that by giving myself a percentage advantage in everything I do, I will eventually have accomplished something, worthwhile. That's the way I always look at it.
It's a little like a modulation of luck.
Yeah.
Right. So you could be lucky and suddenly have a whole bunch of gold bricks show up at your house one day, but it's not very likely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
People say, well, shall I buy a lottery ticket and cast a spell for it to win? I'd say, well, the chances of it winning anyway are 1 in 14 million. So looking at what the equation says, you might be able to reduce that to just 1 in 5 million, or perhaps 1 in 500,000. How does that sound? Are you still going to buy the ticket?
Yeah. It's a lot less, it's a lot more likely than it was before, but still not going to happen very often. Yeah.
No.